Skeet skeet. It's your boy. Back once again with an episode of your favorite podcast. And if that is true, please tell your mates, tell your mum, because we're trying to grow these numbers in 2023. We're trying to spread the word, grow the influence, get the noise out there. And we're looking forward. We're looking forward this episode. Last time, it was very retrospective. We were looking back at 2023. We were looking back at 2022 because we're now in 2023. And we were looking back at that first season of Unclear and, lessons learned and seeing how we'd grown and how we'd changed. This episode, our feet are planted firmly in the present day, and we're looking very much forward. This topic is so spicy hot and relevant that Doritos are thinking of bringing out a flavor in this content because it's so spicy hot. That is the topic of AI, artificial intelligence. And maybe this isn't that relevant to you. Maybe you've not, like I have, spent your entire professional life thinking and talking about it. And also you haven't spent your leisurely life watching movies all about it, looking at you, Steven Spielberg. But I would probably argue that over the last few years, and especially over the last few months, you've probably heard it crop up more and more. And I'm finding this to be true. People that I have never spoken to about technology are talking to me about AI. Specifically, we have sort of the AI art generation of like DALL-E and Midjourney. And we have the language generation of like ChatGPT, which has just been giving us lots of gold. We've had lots of memes coming out of it. We've had lots of news stories. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of LinkedIn posts come out off the back of this, but I even saw an advert with Ryan Reynolds for some mobile company, can't remember, which was, using the power of AI to generate an advert, which itself was going to obviously generate revenue for this company outside of using Ryan's beautiful face. So again, it's becoming more and more relevant. And I feel that every time it does, every time we reach one of these AI milestones, we have a same but diff kind of conversation about its impact and about its meaning and about its sort of more, the relevance that it might have on our lives and, again, what it might look for us in the future and very near future. And often I find that this conversation is very much based in fear and anxiety. And I can understand that 100%, but I'm here today to offer another perspective and maybe counter some of those ideas. Just because, as I say, I've spent my life thinking about this, either in a fantastical way or in a much more pragmatic way. And yeah, I guess I just sometimes see things a little differently on this topic and wanted to share some of my thoughts. I think it's really easy when something like these things appear to talk about how they impact us and how these advances in technology that appear to be advances in intelligence, I mean, it's right there in the title, ask us grander questions about ourselves and about our relevance and our own intelligence, and more pragmatically about our jobs. And I think again, all of those questions have merit. But I think what's maybe missing sometimes from the conversation is remembering how long we've been talking about this. I think if we go back to the last milestone, we had the leading Go player, as in the board game Go, was beaten by an AI, AlphaGo, I want to say, from DeepMind. And that was an unexpected victory. Even going into it, there was a lot of confidence from the human player. And even in the middle, but then it became clear. It was a fun, tense match to watch. But it became clear that, this person was going to be beaten, even though they're the top in the world. And when it happened, I remember sort of the look up on their face, and again, full of those existential questions about, well, what does this mean for me? This is something I've dedicated my life to. This is something I've poured my heart and soul into, and I was beaten by just a machine, of course. But I think it's really important to say that people didn't stop playing Go. People didn't stop being good at Go. And of course that's true for when, decades ago, the first time that leading chess players, various, were beaten by AI. And we had, back when computers were even worse than they are now, we had the leading minds in the ancient game of chess beaten by a computer. And yet, chess didn't die. If anything, chess became more exciting, and more people learnt it, and more people play it today, I would argue, than played it then. Maybe it's proportionally, up and down, but it didn't stop the, engagement in chess and the way that chess has continued to be a staple in the human experience. And I think we can take this back all the way and point out that probably the first time, a leading sort of like letter writer, calligrapher, saw the Gutenberg press pressing the first Bible, he probably shit his britches, I'm sure it was a terrifying moment where he questioned himself, he questioned his worth, he questioned his relevance in the face of this machine that could effortlessly, wordlessly pump out the thing that was his craft, that he'd spent so much time learning to craft. I'm sure that was a terrifying moment. But books didn't die. And I would argue, in fact, that without the Gutenberg press, books would not have the relevance they have today. We now look at books as old technology. But of course, in that moment, the printed word was a terrifying new technology. And what did we do? We adapted. So your man whose craft was producing these books, maybe things changed for him, but for humans, for human progress, things only got better, things only improved. And I think that's what's obvious to me as each of these technological changes occur, is that we kind of have a divergence. As anything enters into mass production like that, we kind of have this divergence. For example, watches. Once you start being able to mass produce watches, you end up with something like a Swatch. Awesome watch, love it. Okay? Worn the world over, a globally known brand name, excellent at telling the time. But there's no less relevance, and if anything, there's more relevance for handmade, handcrafted, one-off timepieces. When something is able to become mass produced like that and can be built by machines at high velocity, the value that we place on the slow velocity craftsmanship of the unique item with its sort of intricacies and imperfections built into it, even at its highest end and highest degree, the handmade watch will have some imperfections compared to a machine-made item. And we value those imperfections as much as we value the exquisite and detailed craftsmanship of the uniquely made item. So we sort of have at one end of the spectrum that like incredibly one-off piece, and we value it very highly. And at the other end, where exist these, the Swatches just firing off the production line at 1 million a minute, we don't value those things monetarily in the same way, but we create value and we create opportunity and we create human skill opportunity in another different way, because now we have opportunities for the people who design the machines, number one, the people who come up with the creative ideas, the people who then are marketing and selling these watches. They had jobs that didn't exist before. And we have this industry that grows up and far exceeds the number of people who is that, one singular individual putting a massive amount of time into one item. As I say, that has its own value, but at the other end, we have this ballooning effect where for every mass-produced watch, there are hundreds of engineers employed, hundreds of marketers employed, hundreds of designers employed, and then each of them brings their own human creative talent to the enterprise, which further kind of synergetically grows the thing. So whilst we might worry at the beginning that turning this over to the machine is going to take away from us, it seems pretty self-evident over the course of human history that every time we make a move like that, it actually just creates loads more opportunity, and there's so many more paths that we can now go in. We almost like, whilst we still place value upon the time-intensive single item enterprise, over on the other side, we find ourselves with time freed up to do other things. Now that we've allowed the machines to pump something out, now I have free time. I don't have to create the watch. I can do this with my time. I can do that with my time. And suddenly now I'm actually busier than I was when I was just a one-off watch maker. And so, of course, that applies to the AI that we have today. Like, if we are finding that, the time and energy that we put into creating a long piece of text before can now be chewed up by this language model in a much shorter space of time, then of course that means that we now have the opportunity to think about something else in the seconds that it takes for us to prompt the AI to do something. If what we're doing is using an AI to create a bunch of imagery, then maybe that is what we use. We can prompt the AI and say, I have this kind of vision in mind. The AI sends us back an image of something that it interprets from our words. And that in itself gives us new inspiration for us to create a painting, a much more time-intensive process. And the only reason we have time to do that is because we offset the boring, time-consuming part of manufacture onto this thing which can manufacture at high speed. So I have never seen AI as taking away from us, but always kind of like adding to our opportunity by taking away the mundane tasks and instead leaving us free time to explore and go further and try out new things. Because I think that's what's crucial about these AI, is that in each of these situations, they're not just generating ideas. They're not thinking. They are artificial intelligence. And what that usually boils down to is just doing a thing like thinking, chewing over a problem, and they're just doing it faster than we could because their brains move faster than we could at that particular job. The idea of generation and the idea of inspiration and genuine, insightful, reaching out into a creative enterprise, that still belongs to us. And generally speaking, we just use these tools to speed ourselves along. And that's why I cannot see AI as anything else but the Gutenberg press just speeding up what we could do already, and therefore allowing us to do other new, exciting, and different things. And I think a problem that, people have pointed out, teachers especially are worried about, for example, ChatGPT writing essays for us. And I think I'm not too concerned about that at this moment in time, because for one, I still believe that reading what ChatGPT says and other language models like it, they're not smart enough to do that. They're not smart enough to write a full piece of text, an essay or a poem or a song, and actually do so in a way that outperforms the best of us or even the middle of us. I think they are good at regurgitating language, regurgitating things that they themselves found on the internet, and therefore it sounds like a garbled, sort of eloquent, sort of boilerplate mess of words that we've heard other people use. And so I don't believe that anyone can ever hand in an essay or ever write a song with an AI and fully 100% convince the reader that it was a human that wrote that thing. And I would argue, if they can, then we need to start changing what the parameters are. Because we had the same conversation, did we not, when Wikipedia came into existence. And teachers everywhere worried that, well, how are my students going to write an original essay now? Because they can just go on to Wikipedia, copy paste, and hand that in. At that moment in technological advancement, teachers were able to spot when that was happening. You still have your human level of intelligence and insight to be able to read through an essay and say, I don't think this reads like original content. I think this reads like somebody copying, pasting, and hashing something together and spitting it back out and delivering it just with their name at the top. And that's not sufficient for what I'm asking them for here. So there's kind of two takeaways here. One is maybe we should start looking at a different way to grade students accept essays. Because if we're saying now that so many tools are available to write essays, starting with the advent of the internet in general, and now taking us to a point where we have an intelligent AI able to read the internet for us and regurgitate it for us, maybe if we have those tools, we need to accept that we need another way to grade students that isn't just essay writing. In the same way that we moved on from handwritten essays as soon as we had decent word processors and we had public access to them. Now that we're at the point where we have public access to essay generators, we can all accept that those aren't going to be very good, but that some people are going to try and use them in the same way that some people try to fob off, Wikipedia articles as their own intelligent insight. So we can say in general, let's move away from that and let's move forward and let's move on to a different way to grade our students. I'm recognizing that that's a very simple thing to say and a very hard thing to implement, but it does sort of beg the question. Now we're at this moment in technology, are essays and things that can be so easily mass produced by these tools, are they still the best way to test the retention of information in our students? Maybe not. But also I find it really interesting that there's a lot of conversation around the art generators and the way in which they regurgitate the information that they receive. They are fed these models on imagery that exists in the world, content that exists the whole world over. All of art history can be rifled through by just doing a basic image search, can be ingested by these models and then be regurgitated and spat out, combined with, an image or whatever, so that it creates a new, quote unquote, piece of art that is a small JPEG that is a representation of what this model has understood from the words you've said and how it's pieced it together from all of the pieces of art that it's found on the internet. And there's a conversation here which I find really interesting about well, then what is art? And what are these things doing? And are they creating art? Because aren't they just regurgitating these things? And isn't that copying? Isn't that plagiarism? Isn't that stealing ideas? Isn't that not properly crediting the people where that original art came from? And I just don't see it that way, because couldn't you describe all of art history in the same way? What these AI are doing is just a version, again, sped up, turned into code, but just a version of what humans have been doing forever. There is a notion of original idea that you bring to the table and unique interpretation, but there is no art that exists today without art history, without having seen other people's work, without having consumed other people's ideas. There is no art that exists in that vacuum. So I find that there's a really interesting debate here that's maybe not being had as much when we accuse the AI of copying and stealing and plagiarism, and we're not accusing other artists of doing the same. We see one as genuine artistry and one as interpretation and one as, referencing and sampling, and the other one we see as stealing. And I think that conversation has been happening in art for a very long time, but it just seems that as soon as we involve AI, we all come down on one side. And I don't know if it's as black and white as that. And I believe that there's a bit more nuance to be had in the conversation about the difference between inspiration and theft. And I think what's crucial is that I doubt, and I sincerely hope, that no one is out here prompting an AI to create a piece of art and then passing off that piece of art as entirely original or entirely their own, or, producing it with that frame of mind, that they're an artist and their only paintbrush is the AI tool. Maybe that person exists. But again, I would say, I think that human beings still, at this moment in history, have the ability to distinguish that copied, stolen, JPEG, and distinguish that from other things that have taken genuine human input and creativity. But again, this is what my point would be. If anybody can do that, if anybody can type into their AI model, create a new piece of quote unquote artwork and have it there on the screen, then isn't there another brand new artistic opportunity, which is taking that generated artwork as the springboard and leaping into whatever comes next? Taking it a step from there, saying, okay, well, the AI and all other technological advancements have pushed things forward to such a degree that I can just do this and just create these generated artworks. So then what is the human opportunity? The same way as mass producing the watches allowed us to be more creative about the design of watches in general, now that we can mass produce art, what is the best way for us to spring forward into the next step, the next part of art? What is the next chapter? Because clearly we're saying we can do this now. We can all do this. Anybody can just create in this way, and anybody can create a set of pixels that approximates, an idea as robbed from all of art history. But if that is also an accurate description of most artists up to now that we're saying that, computers can do it, it's too fast and therefore it's too easy, therefore it's too illegal, isn't it then incumbent upon artists to say, okay, well, now what is next? How do we take it the next step further? What can we do now that the AI can't do? And I think that's where the creativity and the humanity remains, is we recognize that technology has brought us to here. So the question is, how can we go beyond? And the last thing I wanted to say is really just something that I've been thinking about since I was at architecture school. Because I remember it was very early on, and, it was like first week of first year, maybe even. And we were presenting some kind of building, obviously, architecture school. And we were presenting our concepts for these buildings and presenting the ideas behind them. And somebody was presenting like the initial idea for their building, and they were saying, and here's the space where the natural part of the building ends, the natural part of the landscaping potentially ends, and here's the part where the artificial part of the building begins. And all of the first years went, wow, that's cool. Natural meets artificial. And there's a hard line between them. Wow, that's so interesting. God, yeah, wow, cool concept. And I just remember our tutor and all the other 60-year tutors who were kind of supporting tutors just went, what's the difference? What's the difference between artificial and natural? And all of us first years obviously had our minds immediately blown. Because you think to yourself, well, that's an easy question to answer. But is it? I'm sure there's a decent amount of philosophy that could delve into much more depth on this. But, you've tuned into this podcast, so allow me to just give my armchair philosophy on this. But their point is that how can you possibly begin to define the difference between natural and artificial? Because one can't exist without the other. You have to, at some point, make a definition. And if you are making a definition, then that's your pretty arbitrary definition, and the guy next to you is going to have a different definition. Therefore, there is no hard line. Therefore, it is a very blurry line. Therefore, it is a nice gradient. Therefore, maybe there is no difference between the two. We threw around a lot of ideas about like, well, humans are the difference, right? If we're saying that the natural part of this architecture, this building that was being designed, is going to be landscaping, is going to be sort of flowing trees and flowers and a garden. And then the artificial part is going to be sort of steel and concrete and hard edges and built materials and resistant materials that we use to create structures. And then we live inside those structures. And that's the difference between the two. But that falls apart almost immediately, because everything that goes into the construction of the steel and the concrete can be found in nature. And everything that has gone into the landscaping of the plants and the trees, the putting them in a certain order, has happened with human intervention. So neither of those things are that different from the other. And also in that same moment, you're defining humans as the distinction between the natural and the artificial, which is a strange perspective because it imagines that humans are unnatural. But they're not, of course. We evolved. We existed on this planet for as long as this planet's been around. You know, we've come from that same Earth, that same evolutionary tree has given birth to us, and perhaps, you know, one day we'll evolve into something else. So that means we're part of nature. So if we're part of nature and we're using materials from nature to create things, how can we ever describe those things as being artificial or unnatural or separate from nature in any way? Because really what we're describing is, in fact, one part of nature creating another part of nature, that it still exists in nature. So this distinction all falls down. You know, would we look at a beaver dam and say it's artificial? Would we look at a termite nest and say it's artificial? Obviously not. Nature has created the termite as much as the termite created its nest. Therefore, nature has created the nest. It is natural. So with that in mind, we have to think about this next digital stage of nature in that same way. What is really the distinction? Oh, that, you know, it exists in this other space. Well, where is that other space? Oh, well, it actually exists physically because we have physical computers and we have physical servers, and those servers and computers are made of materials that we got out of the ground, and what runs between them is electricity. Nothing is actually not real. All of these things exist. They take up, if not space, then electrical energy. And so therefore, all of these things are natural. I think it's really easy to think about AI as this other and this different thing. But if we look at it in that way, and we consider it as, well, we made it, and we're natural, then surely it is natural as well. Can we really, really define a hard line between the real world and the digital world? Between the natural world and the digital world? Can we really say that there's a distinction there? And therefore, can we really think of AI as artificial intelligence? Or isn't it its own form of natural intelligence? And we, another example of nature at work, have created it. And so maybe it is all a part of what we're doing here. And maybe AI is very much meant to be, if you consider that, you know, evolution has some kind of trajectory, or at least some kind of forward momentum. Maybe we can think about it as that next step. And that makes me very excited. Because now we're not just in this world thinking of ourselves as separate from it, thinking of ourselves as other than, but we are accepting that we're part of it and we're having such a great influence of it that we're ushering in that next step. And so I think it's really easy for us to be scared and fearful and anxious about what AI means and what it maybe takes away from us. But I think we need to spend a bit more time with the opportunities that it gives us, the testament to our own intelligence, to our own creativity, that we created it, and to see it as part of a very natural evolution of our species. We've come from one thing, we're inventing, and maybe now we're moving on to another thing. I don't think that's happening now, but I think with each of these milestones, we do something more and more amazing. And I think we should celebrate those fantastic achievements. And we should see ourselves as part of that long line from past to future. And that's what I think the problem is.
Sure. Here is a brief overview of how ChatGPT works. ChatGPT is a large-scale language model that uses a deep learning technique called unsupervised pre-training. This technique involves training the model on a vast amount of text data and then fine-tuning it for specific tasks such as language translation, question answering, and text generation. The model is based on the transformer architecture, which is a type of neural network that is particularly well suited for processing sequences of data such as text. The transformer architecture allows the model to attend to different parts of the input text at the same time, which improves its ability to understand the context and generate coherent and fluent responses. The model is trained using a variant of the transformer architecture called the Transformer XL.